If it's illegal, let the courts decide. If it's immoral, let social Darwinism decide. And if it's not true, let common sense decide. Why the Trump ban from Twitter has no basis in reality. They preempted it. Even if you believe he was guilty of the insurrection aspect, while the legal proceeding was still going on, they banned him preemptively before it even concluded, right? So you're seeing like an oligarchical usurpation of even a legal process, right? They're having the impeachment, the hearing to see whether he is guilty or not. So even if he was, it would have made more sense for them to at least wait till that concluded and then do it if they were doing it on that basis. Then once he was acquitted in that setting, now it makes them look even more strange because not only did you preempt it, assuming that was your basis at all, and you just don't have animus against him, but more so, now they acquit him in that setting, but you still leave him banned. So you were wrong twice. You were wrong for jumping the gun, and then you were wrong again because they were acquitted, but you still left him banned. And what's strange about it is even criminals get to speak. So the idea is like they were doing documentaries of Charles Manson in jail and, he was giving interviews and stuff. Wouldn't he be more a direct threat since he's not only a convicted criminal, but his crimes involved directly giving orders to people to kill, and that did actually work out? Wouldn't that be a threat? Wouldn't you say censor that? But instead they did documentaries and this and that. This was obviously decades ago, but I'm just saying. So should he have his Twitter account? Are all criminals banned from Twitter indefinitely if you're convicted of a crime, even if you were? But now we're speaking of someone who isn't even convicted of a crime, right? Who was acquitted and is a free private citizen. But even if you were, that doesn't preclude the right to free speech, the idea that you committed a crime. Even from jail, if you have access to a computer and you want to, depending on those regulations of the jail, it wouldn't have to do with the platform itself. So it's like you're jumping the gun in so many ways, yet people somehow accept it anyway. What's important is even if you don't like him, I'm always about a standard process, right? Focus on the process or the policy, not the person, right? You don't have to like anybody. You should be skeptical of all these people in positions of power, but it's more like that process is unsound and arbitrary, and it's not based on anything. And when you look at the term, it's like, okay, so you could even pose it like, so let's say he's literally Hitler, right? He's the worst person ever. There's two factors to consider, right? Somebody was president for 4 years. But even if they were literally Hitler, that shows you checks and balances work because it prevented him from doing anything nearly as bad, or at least checks and balances should work, right? So you shouldn't even fear that. That's kind of what the checks and balances system presumes, right? Nobody should be given so much power, so it wouldn't matter who it is. They could be the best person ever, but they can only do so much good, or they could be the worst person ever, but they can only do so much bad. And secondary, the worst and most damaging leaders in history always come as a result of, at least in modern history, 20th and 21st century. What did they always have? They had a buffer of the media. Either they could silence it or they could push propaganda in their favor. They had control over the media, like what we see in China now, but so many countries around the world do it. So that's one thing that we didn't have to worry about in this scenario, because one thing you can certainly say is he was very criticized by every major outlet except for, let's say, Fox. So that's one outlier. That's fine. And I like how people are so quick to point that out, like, oh, Fox is biased. Fox leans this way, right, and Republican and stuff. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. But then they can't see that other networks lean another way. And it doesn't matter which way you go or how many. It's like a hive mind thing, right? One network says one thing and every other network says the other thing. Both of them are opinions, but because there's 5 networks saying one thing and one saying the other, it makes them seem right. There is no false duality. There's nuance. There's stuff in between. They shouldn't be making assertions in the first place. But getting back to the point, he was certainly adequately criticized. So even if he is as bad as they say, imagine if Hitler is criticized that much, it would have obviously prevented him from, in the public eye, it would have prevented him from gaining that much more power and doing what he ultimately did. So that amount of criticism is good and healthy and should be consistent throughout all. You should be doing it based on standards, not based on cult of personality, like, oh my goodness, this person is just bad. One of my old sayings was in debates, like, don't specify the conflict, right? It's not about just one thing. That could apply to anything theoretically. And also, like, don't give any one person a monopoly over sin. He might be bad, but that doesn't mean other people can't be bad too. You shouldn't be alarmed when people say, oh my goodness, this person is bad. Okay, fine, they all are, right? In positions of power, power corrupts. But you should be alarmed when people say somebody is good. So when they use that to say, oh, this guy's so bad, so therefore everyone else is perfect, then they're just using that to blindside you. No, they have their issues too, so go based on policy, go based on something else. So the point is, he was certainly adequately criticized, so that's a good thing. When you look at the aftermath and support and 74 million votes and stuff, then it's harder to rationalize, like, oh, they heard the criticisms, everybody knows, they just don't agree with them. It's treated as like objective fact when it's just an opinion. The fact of the matter is, what you're looking at is a scenario where you were harshly and adequately criticized. that is at least one element that's missing from being the big, bad, worst person ever, right? Normally they would have that benefit, and that's what would make them truly dangerous. So nobody should ever have that benefit is the point. Even if they seem so good and so perfect, you wouldn't need to fluff them up, right? Just let that goodness then speak for itself. Then you have sort of the false duality of election denial, the idea that you can't raise questions. That's one of the hallmarks, pillars. You always can raise questions, and if you're wrong, then so be it. But there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's such a conflation. Like, oh, one person, this is the lowest common denominator fallacy. Like, oh, one out of, a few people out of 74 million will do something, and so therefore that discredits the 74 million. Well, you could do that with any group of people. Any group of 10 million people, 1 million people will have a few lowest common denominator. So if you use that to discredit, then you could just discredit every group no matter what. It doesn't work, right? So that's nonsensical. So you're not only conflating the act of violence with the act of questioning an election, but you're also conflating that with everybody who's associated with a person. Again, don't specify it. A criminal act is a criminal act. Act of violence is act of violence, but that has nothing to do with just this one big bad individual. And of course, we heard a lot of that in 2016, so it's selective too. Like, it's the worst thing in the world now, but it was perfectly okay to question it then. Again, even if the questions were legitimate, that's not even what we're saying. Like, I'm talking about in the early goings, like, you can raise questions. Now, it turned out to not actually lead to a successful impeachment, so that makes them look kind of bad. It's like, it creates the boy who cried wolf syndrome at some point. Like, even if they're right, they failed on two levels. Number one, this guy's supposed to be a moron. So either he's a moron who's done nothing wrong, or he's a criminal mastermind genius who's gotten away with every crime under the sun. And the people after him, a lot of which are his political opponents, it's like, you've had so many chances to get this guy. If he is as stupid and as guilty as you say, it shouldn't be that hard to prove it. It shouldn't be next to impossible, right? And you say, oh, other people will protect him in government, but that's presumed no matter what, right? The whole point is you should still be able to get through that. So at the very least, they're so incapable that you shouldn't like them either. You're like, man, you can't even catch this moron who's done all these terrible things. Well, that means I won't support you either because you're a clown who can't, you know what I mean? If they can't even catch this big bad guy, what good are they going to do for you in any other way? But there's such a sense of pervasive certainty. See, this is why people get jaded. There's no doubt that if you look into anyone that deeply, they've probably done something wrong. But the point is that not only the selective focus on that, like George Bush is an unconvicted war criminal, but nobody, lost their mind about that as much. To this day, he's still perceived in like a positive way in the public eye of the media, and that's, but according to international law and so forth. The fact of the matter is, it's not only selective, but it's just kind of strange. Like, how could you fail so many times? It's quite clear that you have some other incentive in mind. It's not like double jeopardy because it's not the same crime, but at what point does somebody get falsely accused of stuff, again, in a legal context that they don't get convicted of it or impeached in this case even, right, as a validation that they actually did something wrong? How many times can you just keep accusing? Either you're too incompetent to catch them, so just give it up, or they didn't do anything, or there isn't enough evidence or whatever, but you're not. It's just like one of those things that they just won't give up. I don't like that boy who cried wolf mentality. Because like, you're like me, you have no horse in the race. You're just an objective observer. So when you hear all this, you're like, okay, interesting, collusion or whatever, and you'll hear it out and you'll wait for the result of the legal setting, legal environment, and then it ends up with acquittal. So what am I supposed to say that? Do you not respect the legal outcome? So it's like how the conspiracy theory is used as such a buzz phrase. Well, that's a conspiracy theory. Then whenever it's something that's not proven in a legal setting that you're sure of or that you believe in, it wasn't proven in a legal setting. And so even if it's true, it doesn't mean it can't be true, but it would be considered a conspiracy theory because you have yet to actually prove it. So it's amazing that people on that side of the aisle would, they're so willing to believe all those things that haven't been proven in legal settings. But then anytime somebody suggests something from the other side, right, they'll say, oh, the whole thing is rigged. That's why he didn't get impeached for this or that. The system is broken there. But then it's not broken when things go their way in other ways. So like, you can't have that. You have to respect the legal outcomes if you're going to use that term, even if you don't like them, even if you don't feel like they're valid. And it shouldn't be a popularity contest. It should be a policy position. Like, let's say the president is responsible for two key categories. One is the economy and two is war. So he kept the country out of wars, no new wars, the first president in decades to do that. Check mark at that point. And then the other one is the economy was very good, aside from an unexpected and very rare circumstance with COVID, which again, that would be an equalizing factor across the board where it would clearly cause some problems. But even if that was the lone reason, that's what's ironic, right? People would use that as an argument against him. Well, if that's the argument against him, what if that didn't happen then, right? In other words, he was doing a great job and then that came along and he sure botched that one. But it's like one of those things, like there's a preconceived notion, like this person is bad and we can't explain explain exactly why he's bad, but just take our word for it and we'll fill in the holes. So at first it was this one thing, then that didn't work out, so it's another thing. Like, there'll always be something. So it just shows you an animus and a bias, because it's like, no matter what is happening, like, it could be a once in a lifetime, once in a generation occurrence, right? Something that's affecting the whole world and is turning everything upside down. And even if you want to, okay, blame that on them. But then how come there was so much hysteria before that? Like, oh, he's so terrible, this and that. I thought it was because of that particular event that's happening. But no, it was just always something. There's always a reason why this is just the worst possible person. You know, it's like they want to piece together why that is. It doesn't matter why. It's more important that you just know how bad he is. And if you want to do the popularity contest angle, then idiosyncrasies are enough to sink anybody, because if you really look deep enough, that's not what it should be about. Yeah, somebody comes as an outsider, they intend, and they even say they want to disrupt things and kind of make everybody in those positions nervous, and he sure damn well did that. So in a weird way, it's strange that you would look at it like that. Like, two things can be true. This person can have flaws and you can hate him, a useful idiot at most, I would call him, but it can still expose the biases and ulterior motives of other people. And the last thing is like, oh, there's no such thing as voting against. So by that logic, like, oh, it's this big bad guy you can only vote for. That's how you get some of the worst leaders in history, as I would say, like, is when you vote not for someone, but against someone or something. But by that logic, you could vote for literally anybody, Kanye West or like whatever, whoever else was in there. But by that logic, you should go independent then, not just one of the two predominant parties. So the independent argument is like, if 81 million people had done that, it's still consistent with seemingly the only basis or platform that was there, which was just that this one guy is just so bad. The real reaction to that is just don't vote for them, and then they should lose anyway because they're just not good, right? But if you don't have any conviction in who you're supporting, then that creates problems, because you're just letting yourself get blindsided. So you have the worst person ever, so you'll get the second worst person instead, right? Or somebody just as bad. It's amazing when that's like the platform. You have no platform, so you just say the other guy's bad, or like, we're bad but the other guy's even worse. Like, what kind of a thing is that? You shouldn't need to do that. Don't focus on them, focus on you, right? Because that's what people are actually supporting. But of course, that's not what happened here, clearly. And it's like this individual, right, who benefits from 81 million. The problem with it is, how can you prove that something was rigged or influenced in a certain way? It's kind of like a good bluff, right? You say it's rigged, let's say at the polls or whatever, but that's not what it's about. The real reason, we saw the writing on the wall the whole time, right? How there was this much animus in the corporate media, etc., for him, the other guy. And so the reason is, this other guy who got 81 million ran twice before and wasn't even his party's candidate. He didn't get anywhere near 81 million, and all of a sudden he does now. So what happened to him? It would be something that's hard to explain without that media influence. There was a Time article that at least admitted this, but they said they were doing it for the right reasons and it was a just thing. So at least give them credit for at least acknowledging the clear reality. Most people would just deny it and act like, oh, you're just being, somehow sour grapes or something. Again, false duality, as if you have a horse in the race. But the bigger picture point is, they ran twice before, they weren't even their party's nominee, and all of a sudden now in their old age, less coherent than ever on an objective basis, now they get the most ever. What could have possibly changed, right? There's obviously some outside force that's involved.